Hello and welcome to one and all. So in today's class, we'll continue with the measures to control overpopulation. So in the previous class, we checked the causes of overpopulation and some of the measures to control the overpopulation. Actually, the measures, they're categorized into three economic measures. Second one, social measures. And the third one, the family planning programs. So yesterday, the previous class, we finished with this economic measures and the social measures. So in this class, we will check out the what are the measures taken in the third one, the family planning programs. So actually, India is the first country officially to adopt family planning techniques to control the overpopulation. And somewhere in 1950s, the Maharaja of Mysore adopted this. But China borrowed this concept from India and strictly implemented that one child norm and became successful. But in India, even though it is adopted officially in India, it is not that much successful because in India it is voluntary. Family planning, it is not compulsory in our country. It is voluntary. So that's why in 2010, the birth rate, India, it was 21.8 per thousand. 2010 is the 2011 census, 21.8 per thousand, whereas in China, they were able to reduce to this opposite, 12.1 per thousand. So the meaning, this one of the very efficient measures to reduce the birth rate or the control the growth rate of population in a country. Okay, so since it is voluntary in our country, only to a certain extent it is possible for the government to implement this program. The government can only persuade the people to follow this program. So some of the programs techniques adopted by India is, the first one, what the government had done is something called as the public information program. So here in this program, through media, informing the people what are all the benefits or advantages of having a small family. So that is informing the benefits of small family through media. That is, it can be in the form of newspapers, radios. Once upon a time, radio was popular, and TV. Okay. Then the second method adopted was, or is not was, it's still going on, incentives and disincentives. So incentives and in the sense that uh, indirectly inducing the people to adopt the family planning technique, in the sense that the government started giving preferences in employment. That is, those who are having a small, only 2 children per family, only those people are preferred in employment, especially if you say the government jobs. So alternatively, it acts as a disincentive also. Preferences in contesting elections, and also awarding cash prizes to those who control the family size. So some of the popular or populist methods adopted by the country. Okay. Then the third technique used the establishing the family planning centers at various places. So including the rural areas. So this center, I mean, establishing these centers at several places and providing the clinical facilities and distributing whatever the requirements to the people. So establishing family planning centers at different places, whatever the clinical or medical assistance to be provided, all these are provided free of cost. Providing clinical or medical facilities and also distributing contraceptives. Okay, because when you see the majority of the rural folk, they're not even aware of this. They are very ignorant. They don't even know that. So some people have to persuade them to undergo all this. So they don't have the proper medical assistance and all. So family planning centers have to be established and all these medical assistance all have to be provided to them after making them aware of what are all the benefits of having the small family. Okay. And then finally, research in the sense that, um, medically the research should be conducted. So proper research in the areas of demography and biology. We in the sense that, for example, you take some of the families, the size is more because of the high infant mortality rate. So a research has to be done. Why in this particular area, why in this particular district, high infant mortality rate is happening. So like that, medically, the research has to be done and appropriate solutions have to be provided by the country. So for that, the government has to undertake the research to suggest measures medically. So these are all like, you can see that all these are just like persuading the people and providing to a certain extent, the government is providing the assistance to the people to follow the family planning methods. So beyond this, since India is a democratic country, beyond this, it is not possible uh, to do anything. At one point of time, during the time of emergency in 1975, there was some certain kind of forced family planning thing happened in our country, but then only during the short duration. But apart from that, mostly it is done only voluntary. So at the most, it is only possible for the government to indirectly persuade the people to restrict the size of their family. So these are all some of the techniques which are adopted by the government, and still it is a long way, it is still ongoing process, but there is a lot of awareness among the people as of currently compared to what it was earlier. Because as you know, the starting from the increase in the literacy rate and the educational facilities in the country and also the health standards in the country, so there is in the last 60 70 years, there is a tremendous progress in all these areas. So because of this, there is a lot of improvement in the when you talk about the awareness among the people. But still, we have to, even now, the birth rate is somewhere around 1.64%. Still, it has to be reduced to less than 1%. So still, we have a long way to go. Okay. So this is the uh, topic, causes and measures for overpopulation. Now, moving on to the next topic, occupational and sectoral distribution of population in India. So it means what is the percentage share of occupation in each and every sector. So how the division or the distribution of labor force in three different sectors. So that is the meaning of occupational distribution of population in the country. So that means the division or distribution of working population, that is the labor force who are working. So there is a labor force is different, working population is different. So all the laborers in the country, they are not working, isn't it? So out of the labor force available in the country, how much percentage of the labor force are working and how they are distributed in three different sectors of working population among three different sectors. So that is primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. So this is known as the occupational distribution of population. And so primary sector, just to make sure what are all the activities that are included in the primary, secondary, and tertiary sector. So primary sector includes agriculture, animal husbandry, all the allied activities of agriculture, animal husbandry, forestry, fishery, etc. Okay. Then secondary sector. So this includes manufacturing industries, both uh, small scale and large scale, both small scale and large scale, construction, electricity, in the sense electricity, generation of electricity. Okay, power distribution comes under the tertiary sector. So electricity generation, that comes under the secondary sector. Electricity, gas and water supply. And this there's one more category, mining and quarrying. So this sometimes this one, it can be included in the primary sector. Sometimes it is included in the secondary sector. So depending upon the central statistical organization, based on a particular year, in which category it keeps changing. So at which category it is including. So it can be either in primary or it can be in the secondary sector. Okay, and then the third, tertiary sector, the tertiary or the service sector. It is also called as the service sector. So the tertiary sector includes activities like transport, communication, trade, hotel, banking to finance, irrigation. So all these are included in the tertiary sector. IT, trade, etc. So all these come under the tertiary sector or the service sector. So this is the primary sector. It is called as primary sector because it is primary, it is basic for human existence, and it is performed which with the help of nature. Okay, and all these are the other activities. The last one, tertiary sector, these are all the providing services to the people and providing services to the primary sector and the secondary sector. So that's why it is called as the tertiary sector or the service sector. So these are all the activities included in each and every sector, and how this working population is divided into these all these different activities. So that is the occupational distribution of population. Okay, and how the occupational distribution of population change, the percentage of occupation change from one sector to another sector over a period of time in our country. So let us check with the data. Okay, so how the occupational distribution changed in India. So first let us take the, starting from 1951. So first let us take the primary sector. So primary sector, if you check the data, in 1951, nearly 72% were employed in the primary sector. And 1971, still it remained the same. And 2010 decreased to 51.1%. And as of 2019, it is 42.6%. So what do we understand by this? So this between 1951 to 1971. So the percentage remained constant. So between these two periods, the percentage of, or let me write it here. So between 1951 to 1971, that is nearly for 20 years, the percentage of labor force employed in the primary sector remained constant. So that is the percentage remained constant with around 72% between 1951 to 1971. Okay. So later, even though it decreased to 51% in 2010 or 42.6% in 2019. Okay. So, but what do we understand by this? Even though it, of course, first 20 years after initiation of planning, there was no change in the shifting of labor force from the primary sector to the secondary or the tertiary sector. Still, it remained constant. And even though it now in 2019 or 2010 for that matter, even though it decreased to 50% or 40%, still nearly half or just lesser than half of the percentage of the population, they are still engaged in the primary sector. Okay, so that shows that the dominance of primary sector in the occupation in our country. So but still, when you compare it with the other countries where it is only in the developed countries, it's hardly 1% or 2% of the population depending on the primary sector. So but the fact that still nearly 42% of the population is depending on, is almost half of the percentage of the population depending on agriculture. So it is not very successful. We have not, that means what? We have not still initiated completely the structural transformation that has to be initiated for the progress of economic development in the country. And also, you have to understand that this is, even though it is decreased from 72% to 50% or 42%, it is only the in percentages. In percentages, it is decreased from 70% to 40%. But when you calculate from the, when you check from the absolute number of people engaged in the primary sector, it is increasing. In other words, so this percentage in decreased because of the simultaneous increase in the percentage of labor force in the secondary sector and the tertiary sector. Because of that, the primary sector percentage shows a decrease. But then the same thing, if it is calculated in terms of absolute number of people employed in the primary sector, that numbers keep on increasing even from 1951 to even today. Okay. Then moving, so this is how it is. So that means what conclusion is that major portion of the labor force, they are still depending upon the primary sector. Now let's move on to the secondary sector. Let us check on what is the data for secondary sector. So secondary sector, if you take, it was in 1951, it was only 10.7%. That money, that much percentage of the labor force were employed in the secondary sector. And 1961, it increased to 12.2%. Because during 1951 to 1961, there's a slight increase because during the second 5-year plan, the process of industrialization was undertaken by the government. Second plan between 1956 to 1961. So that was an industrial plan. So because of that process of industrialization undertaken by the government, there is a slight increase in the employment of labor force in the secondary sector. But again, 1971, again it decreased to 11.1%. There was a severe economic crisis. 1961, 61. After 1961, it is the beginning of the third 5-year plan. So after 1961, we had severe economic crisis in the country, apart from 2 wars. And again, agriculture was in disaster. So again, the government had to give importance, focus back on agriculture. So that clearly shows in the percentage shift in the primary sector from the secondary sector, or percentage decrease in the secondary sector. And finally, 2010 increased to 22.4%, and as of 2019 is concerned, it is 25.1%. Okay. So when you talk about the other countries where it is more than 60% of the people or 50% of the people are employed in the secondary sector, we have a long way to go. So what are all the information to put it in words from this data? So it was only 10.7% in 1951. It increased to it in the sense that the percentage of labor force employed in secondary sector increased to 12.2% in 1961, as I mentioned, due to the process of industrialization undertaken by the government during the second 5-year plan. So second 5-year plan, the period was between 1956 to 1961. But again, but decreased again in 1961 due to economic crisis. Okay. And finally, 22% in 2010 or 25% in 2019 compared to, so when you compare this with primary sectors, compared to nearly 50% or 42% in primary sector. So what does this mean? It is, I mean, there is not much progress in the employment of labor force in the secondary sector. Okay. So what does this indicate? Indicates that the expansion of industry is not sufficient to absorb all the labor force. One is transfer of labor force from the primary sector, it is not able to absorb, and on the top of it, because of the overpopulation and more people are graduating, so that much absorption of labor, the supply is not there in the industrial sector. So the demand is not there for that much amount of labor force. So that much industries are not being developed in our country. Okay, so that the expansion of industrial sector is not sufficient to absorb all the labor force. So this is what we call it as a structural unemployment happening in our country. Okay. Now moving on to the third category, that is the tertiary sector. So the tertiary sector, 1951, it was 17.2%, slightly better than the secondary sector. But 1971 decreased to 16.8%, and 2010 26.5%, and 2019 it is 32.2%. So it is okay. There is between these two there is a fluctuation, there is a decrease, and after that it is showing an increase. Okay. Still, what you can say that even though it is increased from 17.2% to 32.2% compared to the same thing, 40%, or the same problem we are having compared to 40% or 50% in primary sector. So that is not a very good sign. So finally, India is not that much successful in transferring the labor force from the primary sector to the other sectors. Okay, that is the conclusion we are finding. Thus, India is not very successful in transferring the labor force from primary sector to secondary and tertiary sectors. But only consolation fact we are having is the in the last 2 decades, that is between 1991 to 2010, the situation shows an there is a improvement in the situation. I mean the rate of shift from the primary to secondary, or the rate of increase in the employment of labor force in secondary and tertiary seems to be increasing in between 1991 to 2010 compared to 1951 to 1971. So in compared to the first 2 decades, the last 2 decades, there is a slight improvement in the shift of labor force from the or increase in the percentage of labor force in the secondary and tertiary sector. Okay, so this is what we are finding out, the occupational distribution of population in our country. Now there is a relation. Okay, we keep on saying that normally there should be a shift from the primary sector to the secondary and tertiary sector, because there is a relationship between occupational distribution of population. There is a relationship between occupational distribution of population and economic development. So several economists, they have mentioned that if a country has to, if you sign the, I mean, if there is an indication that country is progressing, then there should be a shift of the labor force from the primary sector to the secondary sector. See, for example, it's a definition given by, I mean, all the economists agree that the percentage of labor force should shift from primary to secondary and tertiary sector. That indicates the economic development. So as per Colin Clark, he argues that a high average level of real income per head, that is per capita income, is always associated with a high proportion of the working population engaged in tertiary industries, low real income per head is always associated with a low proportion of the working population engaged in tertiary production and a high percentage in primary production. So basically what this definition quotation says that if the country's per capita income has to be more, if the country wants to have a high level of average per capita income, then more and more percentage of the labor force should be employed in the secondary and tertiary activities. If the percentage is more in the primary sector, then automatically there will be low real increase per head. Okay, that's what this quotation says. So these are all based on the observations made by all these economists. So the same it's shared by other economists like Hans Singer, Simon Kuznets. So other economists all are of the opinion that if the country wants to increase the per capita income, then the percentage of labor force employed in the secondary and tertiary activities should be more than the percentage of the labor force employed in the primary sector. See, because secondary sector and tertiary sector is more reliable than the primary sector. And so because of that reason, industries and tertiary sector, industry is a foundation for a country. Okay, so if industries develop in the country, you can rely more on the generation of national income continuously without depending upon monsoons like in the primary sector. So automatically, and we have already seen that people employed in the secondary and tertiary sector, they will control the family size. So the population of the country will also be decreasing. So you can expect more per capita income for the country if the more percentage of the people are employed in the secondary and tertiary sectors than in the primary sector. So that is the significance of occupational distribution of population and economic development. So these are all, I mean, they are, most of the economists, they are having the same view that more percentage of the people should be employed in the secondary and tertiary if the country wants to increase the average per capita income. Okay, so hope it's clear to all of you. So if you find this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any doubts or suggestions, don't fail to mention in the comment box. Okay, so until my next class, next video, take care. Bye bye.